Welcome to this edition of the B2B Engagement Podcast. I'm Gavin Finn, President and CEO of Kaon Interactive. And today we're going to be talking about complex solution selling. We're very privileged to be joined today by Chris Moore, whose focus and expertise is really on everything to do with supply chains. Chris, welcome. It's great to talk with you.
Thanks, Gavin. Good to be here this afternoon.
To kick things off, one of the things I'd like to start with is getting your perspective on how things have changed and the way that people view supply chain and MRO and other things that are associated with this industry since you really got started.
Sure. So I'll go back 30 years ago when I first started in the MRO industry. And really back then, MRO was viewed as an afterthought. It was just a cost of doing business is how people considered it. They didn't really think about there being a way to add value to MRO. And the company that I worked for at the time was really one of the very first people into the integrated supply space. It grew into a company called C-Tech, and they're still around today, as a matter of fact, primarily focused in the automotive industry. So that's really where I cut my teeth, which was in the automotive industry, which are very, very environments to operate in, very, very tough customers, very, very demanding. And that's because of the same pressures that they receive from their customers. So number one, we had some professionalism that we brought to the storm room just around organization, managing inventory, cycle counting inventory, things like that. But it wasn't highly focused on technology for probably the first 20 years of my career. Now, did we say that we managed data? We did manage data, and we did have some technology. It was very, very rudimentary, and it was rarely, if ever, integrated with a customer. And then when I was a site manager, I said, wow, this is so difficult. How am I ever going to achieve all these savings goals? So I kind of started then going down a different path and thinking about delivering value to customers differently, really, than everybody else was doing. And what I mean by that is it was all price focused back then. And sure, price is a huge factor for everybody. Price always gets your foot in the door. But as you get better and better in your supply chain, you have to find other ways of value. So back then, I developed a technical support channel for C-Tech. And what we did was, instead of just beating on people for price, we would say, hey, do you know that we've issued you 19 of these motors this month? That's unusual because we usually only issue you 2 of those motors. We might go out and find a problem with the production line, or we might find that we're using the wrong motor for the application. And we might say, hey, we have this other motor that costs $10 more, but it's going to last 50 times longer. So those sort of technical solutions. And really what I would say is for those first 20 years, price savings, some technical support, and really, keep the supply chain buttoned down is what I would say. The last 10 years, and if you even think about the world around us and how much technology has changed in the last 10 years, and in my personal search or quest to keep trying to find value elsewhere other than just price alone, for SDI, really the fork in the path that changed us into a digital supply chain provider and away from being an integrator was about 6 years ago. Throughout my career, I've always liked to do what I call peer interventions. And what I mean by that is, like, I would visit another country with somebody that has the same title as me, but doesn't compete against me. And we would brainstorm about what they're seeing in their marketplace, their solutions, my solutions, idea sharing, just to further both of our companies and the industry itself. So when I became the CEO, I had known this president of a European company for 10 years before I became the CEO. So when I became the CEO, I called him and I said, hey, let's do one of these things. He was thrilled about it. And he told me that they were trying to develop this product that would really transform the industry and take it to a different place. And think about using all of the things that you're seeing in the world around us: AI, robotic process engineering, advanced analytics with a data lake, cloud computing, all of the things that are normal for the rest of the world, but really not being used in this industry. And they, the end to their story is they really couldn't get the funding and wasn't very successful. But I remember I came back to SDI, and my chief operating officer, Jeremy Jordan, came into my office and said, hey, how did your trip go? Did you learn anything? So I told him about this tool that my friend was trying to develop. And my friend was, very open and shared where they were at. And I had pages and pages of notes. And I shared those with Jeremy. And I remember I said to him, Jeremy, if we're going to survive, we have to develop this. We have to. This is what we need. Like, I've been searching, or, this quest of how to really unlock all of the value. And he said, well, describe to me what it is. And I said, well, think about it this way. you got this garbage can full of useless data. Like by then, SDI had more than 40 years of purchasing data for all different kinds of customers, RFQs that we'd received, data from everywhere. We didn't have a way to organize it in a way that, outside of Excel or one of those databases that was really useful. And I said, you take that garbage full of data and you pour it into this machine, and then out of that machine comes useful information to deliver value to a customer. He said, okay. So I shared my notes with him, and to make a long story short, he came back to me in a few months. And within 3 months after that, we had started developing the product that we now call Zeus today. Now they've developed that product, and it's just growing into, really something that is world-class, where we are, almost on the bleeding edge of that technology for this industry. I guess the last thing that I would say about the supply chain itself is, which this isn't an epiphany, COVID changed all of that. Prior to COVID, I don't think people really knew what you did when you said that I'm in supply chain. Like if I was at a cocktail party and somebody said, hey, Chris, what do you do for a living? That turned into like an hour-long conversation trying to explain it. Now I'm at a cocktail party and they say, hey, what do you do? I say, I'm in the supply chain industry. I don't even, oh, wow, like you guys must be super busy. Everybody knows what it is now. So there's just, that answer is easy and short. There is just so much more awareness and focus on it from.
One of the things that strikes me is that it's over time, it's easy to get commoditized. And that's when people become very price sensitive. And that's true in a lot of different industries. What ends up happening there is people end up viewing that function as a cost center because it's commoditized. So then it's all about how can we lower the cost, right? Something that SDI has done and it seeks to do, which I think is an exhibition of your competitive strategic thinking, is turning what other companies think of as cost centers into value opportunities. And in order to do that, you really have to understand the multiple dimensions of value. Obviously, financial value is something everybody understands. You're either saving money or you're making more money. So that I think people understand. But there are other dimensions of value. And you just mentioned the COVID supply chain issue, which I think your approach uncovers that creates competitive advantages where people don't see it. So a dimension of value might be reliability. How much is it worth to pay a little bit more for something, but know that it's always going to be there, versus paying less and having volatility or vulnerability, in those situations. But in order to do that, you really are raising the level of abstraction about your value story, which becomes a complex sale. It's one thing to say we've got technology complexity and we've got industry complexity, but there's complexity in understanding your go-to-market, your value story. And so how have you approached that?
So data is king is our sales approach now. Let me tell you what I mean by that. So, it used to be back in the, what I'll call the old days, we sold like everybody else did, which is price. Our fees are low. We can save a bunch of money on product because that's what customers wanted to hear. And the truth is, Gavin, we didn't have a good tool to show them otherwise. We would say, we'll guarantee to save you, 8%, 9%, 10%, 11%, whatever. And customers would say back to us, well, how do you know that you can save me 10%? It was a credibility issue for us and everybody else. So the reason I started my answer with data is king is because you really have to unpack the solution and you really have to unpack the customer's current baseline. And then we are able very discreetly to tell customers, hey, this is your current baseline. And we know for a fact from SDI's experience, and they'll say, well, what experience? We'll give them 10 logos, 15 logos, and we'll anonymize the data and say, here's actual results for people that have been down the exact same two paths that you're going down right now. It's a little bit of an education process, truthfully, and you have to do that in a way that the customer doesn't get offended. It's a delicate balance, but you really do have to educate them about these are the goals you're trying to accomplish. Here's what that is really costing you. And then with facts, one of the things that I've seen change over the years, Gavin, integrators were scared to death to guarantee anything because it was all conjecture. We were just hoping that we could achieve it based upon prior experiences, but not specific data points. SDI signs up for guarantees every single day now because, we're so firm in our analytics tool and the value proposition that we deliver to customers and what that ROI is going to be.
No, that's a transformation. That's an industry transformation, right, as well.
Yeah.
I think this is something that we see in the industry a lot is across different verticals is where there is an operating model that people have become used to, as you said, for decades, right? And technology can change. You're essentially making the existing process better, so you introduce technology to do that. It's very rare and difficult to change the process, change the mindset. And I think that's where this education process comes in. But you also, in the process of doing that, you need to articulate a vision for the future that connects with people both on that analytical level, where your data lake comes in and your analytics and insights, but also on the emotional level as well. You have to get them connected to that outcome and get them committed to that outcome and say, that's where we want to be, right? And part of that involves, of course, confidence that you have, but also a partnership initiative. Nobody is going to get emotionally connected to a vendor, right? They're going to get emotionally connected with a partner, right? And what's interesting about SDI is you've carved out a partnership model that is not the same as any other company in the industry. You're not a labor shop. You're not a distributor. You're not the kind of model that they're used to, right? So not only are they looking at a future that they're not used to, but you also are presenting a partnership model that they're not used to. It takes somebody with that emotional courage at the other end to join with you in that partnership, doesn't it?
Yeah, so it's exactly what you said. It has to be a partnership, because the first thing I'll say about the partnership is if the partnership doesn't exist, it's not going to be successful. I mean, we might do business with them for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, but SDI looks to do business with companies for a decade or more is what we're trying to achieve. And it has to be an emotional connection on multi-levels of both organizations. It can't just be me and the other CEO or COO to COO. It has to be multiple levels, because the relationship can't hinge on one individual. It always starts with one individual, without a doubt, and there's always key leads on both sides. But if they're true champions of the program, they're preaching the gospel to both organizations. And we do make it very much personal and make sure our partners know that their success is our success. What we tell them is we're just an extension of your organization. And here's the key difference in what we do and everybody else that you would call a supplier or a vendor. We don't want you to spend more money. If I'm selling you parts, we have goals that are not aligned. They're misaligned. I want you to buy more and you want to buy less. Those are misaligned. SDI's ideal situation, admitting this would never happen, but our ideal situation, and we'll use this to dramatize what we're saying, is that your material spend will go to zero next year. A regular vendor or supplier, that they're going to be mad about that, and they're going to be constantly complaining, why aren't you buying from me? And when we say to those customers, look, we're sitting on the same side of the table as you. We really, truly are. But it is very personal. I spend a lot of my time, Gavin, flying all around the country and on the telephone. In fact, as the CEO, I would say I spend, easily 70% of my time just talking to customers or our employees, one of those two things. I view it as my number one job, because we do want them to know that we're partners with them, and their achievements are our achievements, or their failures are our failures.
Yeah, I think that's a key, but it's easy to say and hard to do, right? Because frankly, it's very uncommon to create incentive programs and structure organizations around customers' outcomes rather than your own. You think about sales teams, most sales teams are all compensated around how much they book, how much they sell, right? Yep. So that behavior model is driven to the previous paradigm, right? It's all about that. What we've seen is that for us, anyway, and I'd like to get your perspective, we've had to change, and we've done this for several years, is to get our sales team's focus is don't sell, help. Once you've helped, some people will buy, some won't, and that's okay. Today's world is so driven by, as you've said in the past, short attention spans and the consumer model of how people buy when they're buying for their personal lives, that it's very difficult to build relationships the way people used to. They used to go and play golf and take people out to dinner, and then that loyalty was built that way. Today, I think you have to start by helping people actually solve a problem or realize an opportunity. And then they'll go out to dinner with you, and then they'll become, closer. But how has that transition been, and what have you done to get your team aligned with that mindset?
So what you said resonates greatly with me, because you're exactly right. It's the same for us as well. We call it a consultative sales process. So our salespeople are not, it's not a transactional sales at all. Our typical sales cycle is more than a year long. And we try to be, as you said, I like the word that you used, very, very helpful in the sales process. We're not secretive at all. SDI is pretty much an open book company. We'll tell them, hey, here's how the solution would look if you did it on your own, and you're welcome to go try to do it on your own. But of course, you won't have our technology to help along with that process. But we very much try to help people throughout that process. And I'll tell you what, Gavin, not only is it just the right thing to do as a human being, but the other thing is I'm always absolutely shocked at how many of those deals that don't work out, that we just helped people along and they ultimately said no, or they just did nothing, that, 1, 2, 3 years, 4 years, they'll come back and they'll say, hey, I spoke to Chris Moore about 3 years ago, and we went through the process and it just wasn't the right time, but now our organization's ready to move. Or, what happens a lot also is those people that you help, they will move to a different organization that is prepared to do it. So the approach that you outlined is exactly the same approach that we take. We are not hardcore. We're not we're not an ABC company, always be closing. We're absolutely not that type of company at all. It's very much a build a relationship, consultative, and really our salespeople's job is to marshal them through the process so that they can make a decision. They're kind of the caretaker or the orchestrator. They're not the subject matter experts. And really, we want to make sure that any partner that we're gonna get engaged with knows our subject matter experts and has a high level of confidence that, same as we do, that we can deliver what they're looking for.
I think that's a transformative approach, Chris, because what that requires is, in order to get the customers to understand it, you have to live it. It can't just be a set of principles on the wall that says, here's our philosophy. It has to be actualized, right? And in order to actualize it, you actually build a value system that creates a culture in your company, and everybody has to live that culture, and I think that you can see it in companies when they are living that culture. That's sort of a brand promise. That's why, we see big companies who deliver on their brand promise are very successful. It doesn't, I think there's a big misunderstanding about marketing in the world in general, about marketing coming up with great advertising or great messaging. Marketing is great when the promise that you make is actually realized when you deliver your solution, right? And those promises are about how customers interact with you at every touch point, right? And I think today, even more so, it's becoming more of a requirement, because you've mentioned this as well in the past, is that there's a convergence between the way people are thinking and buying and making decisions in their personal lives and how they're doing that in their business lives. And so in the past, we used to say, well, we would sell a B2B solution this way with spreadsheets and PowerPoint presentations and all that. But in the personal lives, they can do whatever they're doing. Today, we know that that's actually no longer as true as it used to be. So I think authenticity is becoming one of the key distinguishing competitive differentiators for companies like SDI. It's authentic. If we're able to do business, that's great. If we aren't, but we could be helpful anyway, that's just as great for us. We want, you to understand that your success is a metric. What we've seen at our company is that that's a value system that's sometimes difficult for new prospects to believe because it's unusual, but it transcends everything we do in our whole company. And I know that at SDI, that everybody at SDI lives that value system as well. Right?
Absolutely. One other point I would say, and I hate that to bring everything back to COVID, but it really has changed our industry and the world forever, as we know. But I think that COVID really raised that awareness of exactly what you talked about, the connection between B2B and B2C. Because people started working from home and accomplishing business, and they started to ask questions of, if this is so easy on my consumer life, why can't it be just as easy in my business life? And we already talked about the awareness that's been raised overall around the supply chain. But I would also say a positive out of that is I think that people respond really well to that authenticity in the sales process. Even some of those customers that tell us no sometimes have become, friends that I've stayed in contact with for more.
Yeah. I think it requires that there's some philosophy that people have to think about. They have to think about being open-minded, right? Because as you mentioned, there's an education process there. And I think they have to be willing to be educated, right? A lot of companies or people will come to the table, particularly and I hate to demonize or create caricatures, Chris, but, procurement departments, it's all about, what deal can we get? But if you are open as a person, if you're really ready to be open, to be educated, then what ends up happening is that's when that transformative relationship gets built, right? It's like we'll both learn something along the way and we'll both realize value. And if we can extract ourselves all the way back to this very first point that you made, the circle to that about there's only one way to make value happen, and that's through price. If we can extract ourselves from that paradigm, I think it opens up a world of possibility and opportunities for those customers of ours and for customers of yours to really develop and grow in ways that become strategic for them. And that's where that technology comes in, is the technology is not the answer. It is a facilitator of that strategic opportunity.
That's right. That's very well said. I couldn't have said.
So on a personal note, I know you're a very curious person. You like to learn as well. And I'm curious about whether there's any books that you've read or anything from a podcast or anything that you've experienced recently that has been interesting to you that you'd like to share with the audience or tell us about.
But I had the opportunity to see Terry Bradshaw speak at a Connects conference recently. And I got to tell you, it was fantastic. It was, a motivational speaker about, self-care and interacting with others and, treating people with respect, and that, just chasing the almighty dollar isn't the only thing in the world. There's a right way and a wrong way to do it. And admittedly, I was a little bit skeptical when I saw him as the keynote speaker on the agenda. But I got to tell you, if you ever have the chance to see him speak, and aside from the material being great, he's a hilarious guy too. He was just, absolutely hilarious to see.
No, that's a great way to think about unexpected sources of inspiration, right? So you obviously it's great to see celebrities and athletes and that in general, but to learn from them about how you can improve your own life, I think is a great, as you said, surprise and joy as well. That's wonderful.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, Chris, it's been a real pleasure to talk to you. I want to thank you on behalf of the audience for the podcast and Kaon, and let you know how impactful your thoughts are and your vision, and how much I appreciate everything that you've contributed today.
Thanks, Gavin. It was a pleasure to be here.